In the chat, if you could please put your name, your personal pronouns, what city you're zooming in from, and your organization or school. You can see my example at the bottom there, Ben Robinson, he, him, Denver, Great Education, Colorado. Our goal, as always, for the Great Education Colorado Advocates Network is to create a space for us to build community and take action together. We convene every second Tuesday of the month from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. In just a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and drop the registration link for the June Advocates Network in the chat, so y'all can get a head start on that. All right, community commitments. As always, move up, move back. We want everybody to talk, but that means that nobody can talk too long. Please, if you have something to say, say it, but be respectful of others and let them talk as well. Number two, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Let's learn together. We all come to this meeting from different places, from different school districts with different experiences in school, and as parents, as teachers, with all of these different identities that inform how we think about education policy. So let's recognize that and be conscious and receptive of others' opinions. And then last but not least, presuming positive intent, but acknowledging our impact. We are all here to make the same kind of change in the lives of our kids and teachers. We all want what's best for them. It may happen sometimes that somebody says something that another person doesn't like. So it's on that person to acknowledge that they were maybe hurtful or offensive or whatever it was, and then to move on and continue our discussion. All right. So as always, this meeting follows a listen, learn, and lead layout, and we're going to go to our listen portion first.
No, don't do anything there.
So we have a real broad question about this one, just to kick off the legislative wrap up, which is, what are your observations of the session? What did you notice maybe that you liked, that you didn't like, that didn't work, that worked? And what would you change? So I'm going to go ahead and start putting people into breakout rooms. Go ahead and keep looking at this question. What I will do, as usual, is send it into your rooms via the chat 2 or 3 times while we're talking about it. And we are going to go 8 minutes instead of our regular 10 minutes today, just because of the amount of stuff that we have to cover. Hope we all have some good discussion. I am going to put the link for the June Advocates Network meeting in the chat right now, so you can sign up whenever you feel ready. But go ahead and get a jump on it. I'll just open it up with the discussion question that we all had in our breakout rooms, which is, what did we observe when we were watching the session this year? And feel free to be, answer it in not so, in different ways and stuff, but go ahead.
We decided there were a lot of adult children playing just games and delays and limiting debate, and we expect more from our legislators.
Yeah, adding on to that, this was my first legislative session that I was really involved in a bill, and I've I've always known that our country was undemocratic, but this really blew my mind.
Well, I was in breakout room 5, and there were some very critical remarks about the session from some of the people in that room. Cluster was used, disaster was used, junk heap was used. There were some specific examples of bills that were killed. Bill on the social studies testing, and a couple other very specific things. On the other hand, PPR went up 10%. So I have to say thank you for that in D38. That's really significant. And Polis got some criticism as
That was
well.
bad, but yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Others?
I was just going to say there were a couple comments in breakout room 1 that I think would be really important to hear for everybody to hear about what it was like to testify.
Let's hear it.
Hard.
So I was sharing with in the breakout group 1 that we observed a couple of times when students were at the Capitol testifying, they were either met with aggression from the lawmakers or they were just absolutely, completely dismissed. The lawmakers couldn't even be bothered to look up from their phones to acknowledge them. And I just think that's extremely disappointing, obviously. But also, as I mentioned in our breakout room, we're asking these kids to share traumatic experiences and they can't even be acknowledged. And how is that going to inspire them to participate in this process is my question. So to me, I found that very appalling.
Thank you. Paula?
Well, my experience this session is that we have to get a lot smarter about how we go about this because, and I'm sure Evie would agree with me on this, is that by the time you're at the committee hearing, it's too late. So you have to dig in a lot sooner than that. You've got to get the students down there a lot earlier than that. You've got to get the kids to the right people. You've got to do all of this work before the committee hearing, because at the committee hearing, they've already decided how everything's going to go. Evie can tell you how often it is that something gets changed. So to me, we've got to start tomorrow as to what we want to accomplish next year. We need to find the legislators who will do it. We need to get the bills written earlier rather than later. And we need to start hammering, especially on these Democrats, to get the job that they were voted on to do, get them to do it. That's my observation.
But in all fairness, I got to say that the Republicans playing games with their delaying tactics, they're filibustering, asking for bills to be read at length, which is totally needless, just to extend the time and basically punish the majority for passing bills they didn't like. There is nothing we can do in advance on that, except
Evie, that's not right. I mean, you've got to make the leadership put up the bills early. You cannot have them piddle around with this stuff because the whole session, the whole first month of the session, nothing happened. The bills weren't put up. The committee hearings weren't done. It's ridiculous. We've got to change that whole scenario this year. The Democrats got rolled. That's exactly what happened.
And I just came from a meeting of the League of Women Voters, and some of them were saying that the Speaker of the House didn't control the body very well. There were people got away with being rude and saying negative things, which they shouldn't have been allowed to say. They should have been gavelled out. And other things like that.
Lisa?
Thank you. So for those of you that don't know, I live in House District 65 in Poudre School District, Larimer County. My impression, kind of what Evie was saying about the filibustering that the Republicans were doing, living in a district that's represented by the Senate minority leader or the House minority leader, and having run against him. What I will say is that, they set a trap and the Democrats walked right into it, because by shutting them down and not letting them have a voice, it's the same thing that Republicans are doing in other states. And I've heard that time and time again from people that live in this district who are contacting me, even though I wasn't elected, because they think that I have some kind of influence. But the Democrats, exactly what Paul was saying, not putting those bills up early, not being transparent, bending to the will of our governor when things aren't right, like totally gutting any of the gun stuff. I mean, it's unfortunate that this session turned out the way it did. I was watching late into the night just to see about Senate Bill 213, because that would have adversely affected my community where I'm a planning commissioner. And then as far as the 10% increase for the school funding for per pupil funding, that's great, except for that I sit on a budget committee in a floor funded district, and quite honestly, it still means larger classrooms, higher fees for parents, and districts scrambling to figure out what is going to be covered by the free lunches by the state and what isn't, and are we going to have to backfill? Like, none of those things were addressed. And we have legislators that are down there and kind of being rolled over by the politics instead of doing the job that they were supposed to do and why they were elected. And that includes Senate Minority Leader Mike Lynch, who,
And by
whether
the way, sorry.
whether he realizes it or not, he does actually represent all the people in the district, not just his powerful political position as the minority leader now. So that's my impression of it all.
Well, and on the Senate, sorry.
And Paul, I'll let you go, and then we're going to go to Dawn, because we're going to cut this a little bit short today. We're going to go to 55 and then move on. But Paul, go ahead.
And on the Senate side, Moreno, Fenberg, Weissman, Fenberg, Moreno, and then Hansen, the three nerds who wrote that, along with Kerry Kennedy and Weissman, who wrote that property tax bill. They made some very big mistakes, and they've just got to get smarter. They've got to get, I mean, I was stunned by how bad it was, frankly. And I've watched, and I've tracked 16 sessions. This was the worst ever.
All right, Dawn, and then if we have time, we'll see if we can get one positive.
I just want to say, I think there's a lot of criticism to go around about a lot of things, but I don't think letting the minority, or not like giving the minority a voice, is one of those things. Debate was cut off after, when it was first used, after like 8 hours of debate or something like that, and then a similar length of time on the previous bill. So I don't know what else they could have done there except for that, because they were giving them a voice and it was kind of being abused to intentionally block legislation.
Heard. Thank you. Any last comments about like maybe a positive we learned or something that we can take from the negatives moving forward?
I could share. I think a lot of the new members are really ambitious and really want to do good work and aren't necessarily afraid to try. So for me, I'm really optimistic about that, in not only the education, but in a lot of issue areas that are like also aligned to those things impacting students and parents and teachers and all the things. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Naomi. I'm going to go ahead and just move us on. I think that was a great discussion. I got some good notes. They will appear in our follow-up email as usual. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lisa Weil, who has also seen a lot of these legislative sessions and has a thing or two to say about this one. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for that conversation. That is a really good sort of context setting for what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because a lot happened, and I'm really going to focus in on that last bill that Paula mentioned, the property tax cuts. This is the first draft of history, as they say. It is about 20 hours since the session ended. And so not all dust has settled, or if it has, I'm not exactly sure where it settled. So others have expertise and been watching. I know Dawn and Evie and Paula, as others have spent a lot of time at the Capitol, so hope you will join in. So looking at Great Ed's original goals, the first thing we were hoping for and working for was a referred measure to let voters support teachers. That is something along the lines of what we were doing with Initiative 63. And we did get a sponsor, Kathy Kipp, as you may have read in the paper or heard about here, had a bill with 35 co-sponsors to put the surplus into the state education fund to pay for teachers with the voters' approval. And that did not, well, I'll talk about what happened there. We were hoping for a significant buy down of the budget stabilization factor. We have been advocating for years, and we did, I think it was either the February or March Advocates Network, we dedicated to the concept of a costing out study, being the idea that a state, before rewriting its school finance act and when trying to set goals for how much you need to fund schools, should actually study that in a very scientific way, as most states do. So that was one of our goals. We always have been fighting for extra funding for rural schools because the budget stabilization factor tends to hurt them, the rural schools, more just percentage-wise than the larger districts. And we have been for years part of an effort to make sure that their disproportionate disciplinary practices are reined in, and that there's more equity involved in those actions. So I'm going to go quickly to what happened. We did not get that bill introduced to Kathy Kipp's bill to surplus and put it into the state. I think we did succeed, especially with her finding 35 co-sponsors that represent Senator Zenzinger was on the other side, to start putting the flag, planting the flag into surplus and saying, we have not been doing right by our students. We have over a $10 billion debt from the last 13 years. And so those dollars should be thought of as a way to harness the good economy and help our teachers and help our students. It did not get introduced because almost immediately Representative Kipp was asked not to introduce it yet, as there was something coming. There was something that could be a good use of that would be positive for education, and so it did not get introduced. We did get a $180 million buy down of the BS factor, and as James mentioned, that's about a 10% increase from last year. I will also note that it's also in a year when inflation was 8%. So it at least kept pace and gave a little bit more, but especially in light of the fact that by the end of next year, all of the federal COVID dollars have to be spent. It is incredibly helpful and we're grateful for it, but it is not a fix for our school funding problems. And that gets to the costing out study, which we did get put into the School Finance Act. It needs some work, and you'll probably hear from us again about how we need to ensure that the costing out study that has been commissioned by the state for the first time ever, I don't want to underplay that. That is a very big deal, and it was kind of under the radar. But we have to make sure that the information that is provided to the legislature is really high quality, and that enough is invested in that study to make it really actionable information. And one of the things that's going to come out of that costing out study, I believe, is that ending the BS factor is a superficial, artificial goal. That just gets us back to per pupil funding in 1989, inflation adjusted. And so what the costing out study can tell us a little bit more is, if our goal really is to make sure that every student thrives, what size classes do we need? What kind of, how many adults need to be, and what specialty need to be in every school? That's what will come from the School Finance Act, of a costing out study. And that will give us actual real data about what needs to happen. We were successful in our, Cody, I can't read your whole comment, but I have a feeling that it's sarcastic. We did succeed in getting $30 million added for rural schools. that's one-time money. The legislature has done one-time money 7 or 8 times now. And while that may seem like there's always going to be money coming in, the problem is that they can't really use those dollars for ongoing expenses as long as it's always an add-on. The legislature did say that they're going to finish buying down the BS factor next year, and that's why it's really important that we have the thank you message, but here's what we need for our students. And the last thing is there was a disciplinary a bill about disproportionate discipline that was brought by the Colorado Youth Congress, which is the legislatively created conference of students from all of the House and Senate districts. And that's what they brought forward, to have districts study and act upon any disparities that they found in their own expulsion, suspension, et cetera, and other discipline. It did pass. It turned into a study. But one of the real important issues there is that it was an unfunded mandate. It's not that districts don't want to do right by their populations and study this, but once again, it's the concern is we don't have the person power that we need. We don't have enough adults in the schools and that support system. So that will be to be continued. So before we go to the next thing I'm going to do is talk about 303, Proposition HH, the property tax thing. I want actually, first, Ben, can you show the BS factor? So this is sort of ending that first, what did we want, what did we get? This just shows you graphically what the BS factor looks like now that we have bought it down to 141 million, down from its high of 1.1 billion, I hope. And I'll be skipping back to the, but the thing to look at is you have to add up all these bars over all this time. I've heard Dave Young talk about ending the BS factor is like, you know, the patient was bleeding, and when you stop the bleeding, you say we're done. It's like so much has been lost. So that's what that looks like now over all this time through a thriving economy. We're now still in the BS factor range, but it's only 141 million. Okay, before I go on, I want to make sure I'm not following the chat. So if there's anything that there are questions there, and I also just want to give a couple minutes to others who might want to comment on the School Finance Act and other parts there. Anything? Yeah, Diana.
Yes, you know, I'm still trying to sort out all of this property tax thing, but
That's coming.
yeah, between the two bills and then this proposition, but I worry about that. I worry about the fact that they're going to backfill the loss of property tax to the schools. Is that just going to be ended up being another iteration of the BS factor? I mean, I worry about that. Obviously, and I mean, not only based on, you know, the funds in the Tabor, whatever, you know, recession, you know, all of those things. Are we just going to have another iteration of the BS now that it's paid off? Because then it won't be sacred anymore if it has thoughts.
Well, we'll go through the 303 and HB 1311 and Proposition HH here. But Diana, you brought me to the part, and those of you who've been on a lot of meetings with me know that I really do in every meeting say, this is no way to run a state. Everything, no matter what dial you turn over here, there's another dial over here that can, it's an unintended consequence or a different way. And that's why this is vigilance in this area of advocacy it's continued, is because none of what we're asking is easy. even though I think the voters of Colorado really do want to see great schools that welcome all students. It takes more work in Colorado than anywhere else because we don't have to just convince 101 people. We have to convince several million. So other thoughts about this? And Diana, if I don't answer all your questions by the end, you'll have another chance to talk about the Prop HH stuff.
Okay, I should have started with my question about the School Finance Act. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
There's a provision in there to create a task force. Is that your costing out study?
Costing out study. What that is one of the things that the task force is going to be doing. And when I said there's still work to be done, we need to make sure that that task force has some really great people on it who understand school funding. We had hoped to get the really good language into the School Finance Act. And this is one of those things that's very frustrating. It was introduced so late. We saw the language about what the costing out study would be like the night before it went to committee. And it went through the Senate really fast, and we were working with the House to create a committee, to create an amendment that would say very specifically, these are the kinds of methodologies that need to be used, and this is how much it will cost to do it right. And so we were working in the House, and then the word went down that there would be no amendments in the House because they didn't have enough time to do a conference committee between the two. And so that the School Finance Act got passed the way it was in the Senate. And for all the reasons that everybody was talking about the delays, et cetera, it was a rational decision given where they were, but it did mean that there were some other things that couldn't quite get worked out. And so the task force will be creating the sort of guardrails, the parameters of what the costing out study is, and then we'll go out and do an RFP or an RFQ or something. And so it's really important that that task force have people who understand. And I'm looking at you, John Myers, who has written School Finance Act and done costing out studies for a very long time. That's the kind of people that we need to make sure are on that task force.
Well,
Edie? I'm sorry, Diana.
Well, no, I just, is one of the things that didn't get done. There are no local school board representatives on this task force or
Yeah.
to be on the task force. Like, that's ridiculous.
There are 17 people on the task force, and there are some have to be superintendents, CFOs, people from organizations that know school finance.
Okay.
And they're different, the speaker, the Senate president, and the minority leaders will be making those appointments. So it is required to have some of that diversity.
Great, Edie, and then we're going to go on back to the presentation.
My question was who appoints them? And it sounds similar to the accountability task force in 1241, that they're using the majority and minority party leadership to appoint people.
Right.
Are there any parents?
Specific.
Any parents?
I can't remember, but I think that we could push to make sure that there is somebody from PTA as an organization that knows school finance. So I'm going to get back because I know there are a lot of questions about Proposition HH. And so I'm going to go through it. Again, as I said, this is the first draft of history. And so this is what I know. So how many of you have gotten your property valuation assessments from your county telling you how much more your house is worth than it was 2 years ago?
Yep.
That is a wake-up call to a lot of folks. And it's something that's of great concern to the idea that we might have a taxpayer revolt like Proposition 13 is what's driving a lot of what's behind Proposition HH. There is, in fact, Initiative 21 that has been introduced by the sort of the anti-tax usuals. They have not said yet whether they're going to gather signatures or not, but this is something that's worse than Proposition 13 for those of you who know what happened to California after they passed really strict property tax control. This would not allow the tax for any piece of property to grow by more than 3% ever by year. And it would decimate local districts and schools. So what Great Ed is going to support HH. And it is property tax relief that won't hurt schools. The assumption is, and I buy it, that we have to do something to relieve the taxpayer burden, especially of people who are, as they call it, house rich and cash poor, which is a lot of low and middle income families who would have to forego something to be able to pay the full tax on a property that's gone up in value, but that does not give them any liquidity. And so the why of doing this is to safeguard low and middle income homeowners, especially from those property tax increases, because those families are kids, and those kids will come to school less prepared and with greater anxiety, to protect against extreme measures like in 21, and to secure local revenue for public schools. It really is property tax relief that won't hurt schools, because Initiative 21 doesn't do a thing to backfill what would be lost from our school districts. The how is to reduce assessment rates, and that's just the percent of the property that is being assessed. So if you have a $100,000 house, a 7% assessment rate means you're being taxed on $7,000. So that's the mechanism, is to lower the assessment rates. And the way that we're going to protect schools from the loss that school districts are going to have, because we're going to be collecting less money from local sources, is to retain some of the Tabor surplus to backfill the loss of those properties, and for some low property value districts, like think of a fire district, in an area where there was no property value gain, right? Where things didn't blow up like in the metro area. Cutting assessment rates just cuts their budget. So next, I'm going to try to speed this through, and answer questions at the end. So what is the property tax relief? It reduces residential and non-residential assessment rates for 10 years. To be more progressive and to really target some assistance to the people who need it most, it exempts the first $50,000 from the assessed value in year one. So if you have a $150,000 house, you're only going to be counted as if it's a $100,000 value house. For years after this one, it's going to be $40,000. And it's the $40,000 exemption only for primary residences. So you don't get that for a second or third home, or for an Airbnb, that kind of thing. It makes the homestead exemption transferable. To make that quick, if you're a senior and you've been living in your house for 15 years, you get an exemption. You get a tax break for being in the home that you've been in for a long time. If you decide to downsize, now you're in a new home. So what this does is say, if you downsize, you keep your status as having a homestead. It places a cap on annual property tax revenue growth for local governments other than districts. I'm going to skip over that. That's what's called the soft cap. We can get back to it, but it takes a while to explain. The net property tax impact is a loss of $788 million in 2024 and $908 million in 2025. We are giving, and as it goes on, it will be over $1 billion of tax relief, property tax relief. Next slide. Okay, so this is that won't hurt schools part. So currently, we have the Tabor limit for 2023. And next year, the Tabor limit will be what it was this year, plus the inflation percent, plus the percent in the growth in the population of Colorado, which is flattening out, by the way. What this would do is say next year, and for the 10 years after, the Tabor surplus limit will be this year's plus inflation, plus growth, plus 1%. And that will be the base for the next year, and that will grow by inflation plus growth plus 1%. It changes the slope of the line of the Tabor surplus, which is really important because that formula it was put in the Constitution in 1992 by somebody who wanted to shrink government, and it has had that impact. And so this is recognizing that we need to keep more, because as we lose some of that money, and $788 million is the total loss, not to school districts, but to all local districts. And so in the first 2 years, it will keep 167 million. Year after that, 359 million. And those dollars will be used to reimburse some local districts. There's $20 million that's going to be put into a rental assistance fund, and the remainder goes into the state education fund. And one of the amendments that got made that I think is really hats off to the education community is to get it to the language to say that revenues deposited in the state education fund under this inflation plus 1% has to supplement, not supplant, general funds, because we don't want the legislature to be able to say, well, you know, we've got this extra money, we want to add an extra $100 million, you know, above the BS factor or whatever. So we'll just use state education fund to do that and move general fund elsewhere. And that's what's been happening over the last several years. The general fund, the percent of general fund going to K-12 has been shrinking over the last several years through the use of the state education fund, which is a lot of the federal dollars. Okay, I'm going to continue to get through here. So there's 20 million set aside for a renter relief program. This is what Diana was talking about. HC 1311 was passed. What it says is, instead of the 6-tier Tabor surplus rebate structure we have now, where the more income you have, the more you get back, it just flattens that out if and only if Proposition HH passes. So the lowest income Coloradans will get about $200 more per individual than they would under the current system. And if you're looking at the full picture, the average Colorado homeowner will pay about $630 in property taxes. Maybe Ben, when you have a chance, you can copy that HTML and put it into the chat, as that is a place where you can check out your own, what it's going to mean to yours, your own. All changes are conditional upon voter approval of Proposition HH in November, and if it does not pass, taxes will go up back to 7.1. The assessment rate will go back to 7.15%, but the legislature will probably, I mean, that there would be action at the legislature after November. And then, of course, the other thing we have to watch out for is the possibility of Initiative 21 making it to the ballot and having this one versus one that is going to give a lot more property tax relief and destroy local governments. So I think that was it, right?
I think that's it. Looks like we have some more questions, and understandable if we have quite a few questions for this. So let's go ahead. We've got 11 minutes left. Let's go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Lisa.
Thank you. So you kind of at the very end addressed my biggest concern. Like, my property taxes went up $1,000. So it was devastating because we are not wealthy people.
Right.
Honestly, I don't know how I'm supposed to navigate my mortgage going up by almost $200 a month. But so this is appealing, just like the Gallagher Amendment was appealing to people without understanding the actual impacts that it's going to have, because everybody wants to lower this, lower that. They want to pay less, but ultimately, like, I live in Wellington. We're a small municipality that's taken on $80 million of infrastructure improvements that makes our water utility huge, right? So now this municipality has been battling an 8% inflation with no extra income, and now we're going to take away a massive amount of property tax money, right, by doing this reduction. So I don't understand the thought process on that. And I'm a huge advocate for more money in education. I mean, I've spent 10 years on a district budget committee, and I have teachers for children and kids still in school. And like, I don't understand the rationale, because it's a bad idea.
This is, it's the politics is the art of the possible, and there's all sorts of other statements about it. This is a blunt instrument. Having to go to the voters is a blunt instrument that we always have to use. And it really is just, it's a game of probabilities. Everything, when you're trying to deal with some of the effects of Tabor, it's just like, okay, if we don't do something, something terrible can happen. So can we do something and do it responsibly? And we're sort of testing out that theory of living in Tabor. And so it's trying to sort of split the baby, recognizing that $1,000 is a lot. And maybe you'll get a little bit more from the Tabor surplus than you would have. And that's more fair than people who have $22 million homes getting, $1,500. They'll get $1,500 less from the Tabor surplus. That is dinner.
Right.
So it really is trying to make this as equitable as possible. As I've said to people, why are we endorsing this as great ed? Cutting taxes is not in our wheelhouse. But the long-term goal of making sure that through public education, every student gets what they need in their public schools, if we decimate the local property base, that's an impossible dream. And so we are accepting that, but also looking toward what we can do in future years to make things more equitable, to make our tax system more equitable, to find other ways to direct the benefit of our strong economy and give our kids the schools we need. Nothing's going to be easy here. That's why we need to build infrastructure and networks and knowledge base, and why we're so appreciative of all you folks who come to Advocates Network, because this is a long-term fight, but we think this is a fight that needs to happen in order to avoid digging, trying to get out of a much, much deeper hole like California went down in 1980, whatever.
Right. Can I make one quick comment and then leave you with one question, and I won't talk anymore? But I'm just wondering, I respect why you would advocate for this, but just wondering about the disproportionate effects on smaller communities, right? And so these communities are not going to be able to pay for law enforcement contracts. They're going to have to cut that down, which means more drug and fentanyl problems, no safe streets. I'm the executive director for Safe Routes to School because we need some avenue to fix things. So I'm just thinking we're trading off more money for schools for kids who may not be able to even get there or get there safely, right? And so I'm worried about that. But is this the trade-off for Kathy not introducing that bill? Kathy's my friend, so I'm just asking it because she cares about education.
She does, and I just want to say, she met with us every week and was really working with us on the casting out study. I think she, more than anybody, is responsible for that getting into the bill. She was told to and what I was going to say is that a lot of the if I were to summarize, it's control. So she was told it was her first bill that she was going to introduce, and she was told she had late bill status for it, which she did not ask for. And they said, just hang on, there's something coming. And by she couldn't tell us what it was. I think the fact that she had introduced that and got into the conversation early on made a big difference in making sure that education was taken care of. So it was not without benefit that Kathy introduced that bill. But thank you for bringing that back. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Paula?
Yeah, I don't understand something. I have two comment. Property values have gone way up. So regardless of this bill, there's going to be a lot more money. So I don't get the argument that there won't be enough money. We're going to see a huge amount of money, even with this discount that comes from this indecipherable bill. How are you going to, that's number one. There's going to be a bigger pot, I think. And then number two is the bill is indecipherable. How are you ever going to make the case to voters that this is in their best interest? 311, I think it is, the The bribe to
1311.
vote for this thing? I mean, it's a bribe. How are you going to make this case? It doesn't even seem
well-
ethical to me to make this case.
I'm going to do
But
that
could you
one first,
just
and then I'll get
the
to your
bigger
first point.
pot? Yeah, I'd like to
I'll
know.
get to that one second.
Okay.
This is property tax relief that won't hurt our schools. We need to do some property tax relief, partly for low and middle income folks who cannot afford it. And secondly, to head off something that could be much, much worse. And I mean, that's just the calculus that's being made. And given the cost of putting something on the ballot to get something done, having the governor on board means that it might actually get, it might actually be funded, unlike the things that we've tried to do that I think were decipherable and really popular, but we didn't have the funding for it. To your question about the big pot of money that's coming, it's actually not a big pot of money. It is big for some districts that had huge growth. And I don't know about Wellington and specifically, but there are a lot of communities where cutting taxes means cutting revenue because they did not have a run-up. And so it's really different for each location. And that's why there's a pot of money that is for those local districts who did not see a run-up of their property values, so that when you reduce the assessment rate, there is money available to backfill those dollars. Is it perfect? God, no. But most of it is in statute. And it's the big picture that we have tried to put things on the ballot, and we have not gotten the funding to do it in the way. We got to 47% with Amendment 73 on just a $1.5 million, but we haven't been able to put the things forward that we thought would make a bigger difference. So now we've got something that has the backing of the governor, and it is in our estimate, and that's all we can do in our calculus, better than leaving this to John Caldera and Michael Fields, who have endless money to put things on the ballot.
To me, I feel like this is, and I've already expressed this to Lisa, but it feels like a reminder that legislature electoralism is always a compromise, and it's always going to be a pretty big compromise, and that's why it's so important that we have like a multi-pronged approach. That's why we have to be getting out there and educating our community so that we can build these really informed and active community members, not just like it's like awesome that we're all here, but we're a very small minority when you compare us to like just constituency, right? And so I think like it is like really imperfect, extremely imperfect, and it's also what we can get right now, and that's why we can't just stop at electoralism. We can't just stop with legislation. We have to be doing other things, and when we do those other things, hopefully that brings us to a point later in this world where we can rely on legislation, on electoralism to get us the progress that we want and we deserve.
Thanks, Max. If we can ask for your indulgence for an extra 5 minutes, I do want to make sure we don't have a specific action, but I think all the conversation we had before the presentation really leads to one way that we have for folks to lead. And it's about what Max is talking about. It's about the marathon and the slow burn, and building relationships with legislators over these next few months when they are not running for re-election and they are not in session. These are the only months of a two-year stint where that's true. So Ben, go ahead with that, and then I can stay on and answer more questions afterwards, but I do want everybody to see to get the lead part of our listen, learn, lead.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, if anybody has further questions, sorry, we're out of time. But go ahead, we can, I can get back to the ones in the chat. We'll just email you.
I'll stay on.
What we want to kind of do going on from this session is just make contact with our legislators, not in the sense of like we're asking you to do something, but more like, hey, thanks for what you do. I really appreciate it. I know you're into education. I really like education too. Why don't we grab coffee sometime and talk about it? And the idea here is that we're building bridges early on, so that we can potentially ask them to do more later on. So that's how this works. And basically, thank you for that, Naomi. That's really good to know. But anyway, we made a pretty short email template that you can edit the living daylights out of. Like pretty much everything in it is a suggestion except thanking your legislator and inviting them to, you know, have coffee with you or even a Zoom meeting or something like that. I also included in there, like if you have a group that you're part of, you know, if you're part of a parent group, if you're part of like a district-wide group of policy people or something like that, that needs guest speakers. That's a great way to build rapport with your legislator. And so that later on during the session or before the session, you know, if you have an idea, your group has an idea, or you as an individual have an idea, it's a lot easier to get that message across. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that. It's a Google form. It's just, or a Google Doc, whatever. It's just in the chat. Like I said, edit the living daylights out of it. Do whatever you want to it, but please do make sure that it gets to both your senator and your House member, and that you're asking them to engage. So I will go ahead and drop that there. I'm also going to drop a link for our luncheon, which we already have signups for. Delana, do you have a link handy by chance? Well, or could you get one while I grab this? Or Lisa? Thank you.
I think it's just critical to have, you want a legislator to have you in their, oh, it's an education bill, I need to talk to so-and-so. And that's the kind of relationship that we're hoping to create, because when you have a relationship, it means that when you're in a network like ours, there's lots of people, and in your own communities, you can link them to a school tour, or you can link them to other people and really try to create a kitchen cabinet of education advisors to them, because they can't be experts on everything. I saw a question from James in the chat about, is this going to eventually eat the entire surplus? Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. If an economist will say, I have forecasted this out for 10 years, they are lying. I mean, they can't. There's one thing you know about an economic forecast, and that's that it's wrong. And the economists will admit that, because it's just like, if the banking industry, you know, is stabilized, if there's no, and so one thing that's really important to remember is that we haven't had surpluses forever. There was over a decade where they didn't exist. And so what we're talking about is asking the voters if they feel that this effort to really have property tax relief without hurting schools is important. If that dual goal is important, then this is the way to do it. And as those, we are changing the slope of that line, and yes, it may increase the amount, but that means probably the property tax cuts are continuing as well. Over time, I'll be honest, I hope that our economy does well, and that this will make it possible to keep some surplus for schools. But that's a big question mark. I think the key is that we're doing the best that we can with the tools that we're giving, and the tools are very, very blunt. And so it may be that more and more surplus is being brought in. And if property tax values are going up, it's paying for property tax relief. It's continually paying for property tax relief too.
So the other attack that I'm already hearing is that the property tax savings will be less than what you lose on the Tabor refund side. That it's really a bad deal because you're getting a little bit of property tax relief and you're giving up a big Tabor check. And that argument is never supported with any kind of calculation.
Right.
Okay, but that's the claim. It can't be disproven because, you know, I think it's hard to disprove it because nobody really knows at this point. So, I think as you work on your messaging, those are two things that I'm already hearing, and you might want to try and incorporate responses to those two attitudes into your presentations. You know, but the 10 years out, it's a disaster for you. That one is really hard to counter because, you know, is there going to be another pandemic in those 10 years? Is there going to be another great recession? I mean, predicting out 10 years to me is, it's just
as soon as that happens, there's no Tabor surplus because our income is going to, you know, if our income plummets, if there's a huge recession, there are no refunds because there's no, we're not above the line anymore. I mean, that's what happened. That's why there are no refunds after the Great Recession. But I think we have to really think through the messaging. We haven't had a whole lot of time to think about it, but it's, first of all, it may seem like 1311 is buying votes, or what 1311 is doing is making Proposition HH more fair, more equitable, by taking $1,500 away from people who make more than $500,000 who don't need it, and providing that to renters, for instance, because that was one of the criticisms of this too. You're giving a tax break. Taxes are still going to go up, just not up as much. So are renters going to get any benefit from this? And that's why they pulled out $20 million for renter support. And that's what this Tabor surplus is meant to do, is not to say to buy votes, but to make this tax policy more equitable. And it's very hard to do with such a blunt instrument as a ballot measure.
One man's equity is the other man's redistribution of wealth, which is, of course, a big
that is true.
So watch for that one too, because
it'll always be the case.
I don't want to. I worked hard to get where I am. I really don't want my wealth redistributed to some lazy bum. That's the argument. I mean, that's
it's also interesting that when your property value went up $400,000, your property value went up $400,000. It may not be available to you right now, but congratulations, right?
Right, but they've already forgotten that. It's like that's invisible. My asset went up 40%. I owned $1 million home. I've got an extra $400,000 worth of equity in that. That doesn't matter, of course, because I deserve it. You know, I worked hard, and so that's, you get no credit for that. It's just, you know. Sorry. Thanks for listening.
But James, I really appreciate all of those, hearing what they're going to say, and we really do have to hone our messaging about how to respond.
Yeah. Okay.
Paul, were you going to?
Oh, and I was just going to say, thank you for all the good conversation today. We are about 10 minutes over. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this. Yeah, thank you very much. You will see your follow-up email on Friday. If you would please go ahead and email your legislators. And then if you feel so inclined, check out that luncheon link. Delana, who is on the call right now, has been working really, really, really hard to put that together. And we'd love to see a great turnout. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.